Good morning. Hemshech Ayin Beis, Volume 2. We finished the paragraph on page 1183. I'll go over it again briefly, summing up what we learned. So he's explaining now the next part of the verse, V'yadaita hayoyim. After the long discussion of Das Elyon and Das Tachten, of our perception and awareness, recognition, hakara, hargosha, his chabrus, his kashrus, all the explanations of Das in the previous mimer, how we bond with and connect with, knowing that in our minds, vashavesa levavecha, and drawing it into our hearts, all the way down to action, avedus abirurim, Das Elyon, Das Tachten, ke'avayu alakim, the two ways, Havaya Lakim, either the Shiluv Havaya Ba'adnai or the Shiluv of Adnai and Havaya, which is Das Elyon, and then the third higher level of Das Elyon. Now he goes to the next verse, next part of the verse, B'Shamayim Mimal Va'oretz Mitachas. What does that come to add? So he says, Al Piposha, the basic explanation, it's coming to negate duality, the duality of heaven and earth. That God is in heaven and not on earth, God forbid. Ozav, he left earth. He left earth in the hands of others, which of course is the Das Haminim, those that argue that it's a form of heresy. And more bedakus or more beruchnius, a distinction between spirit and matter, between ruchnius and gashmis, that they distinguish between the two. And ayel lekechem, they say. How could you find a godliness? You can find it in spirituality, in Aveda Ruchnis, in spiritual work, but not in mitzvahs maisis, not in action. And the parentheses, you explain that link, because when you go with Seichel distinguishes between, like he says, Mechalkim ben Ruchnis legashmis. But the truth is, that's not the case. B'shamayim emal v'aretz mitachas Hashem Elokim v'yadaita hayom, you shall know today. And today means in the Tzimtzum and the Gilui, Hayem is Eiren, Tzimtzum and Gilui, like we learned, Yem V'laylo, day and night, that the Eibishter is B'Shamayim Mimal, V'aretz Mitachas, and it's all one. And the Ikar Kavona is Amshachas Alakus Dafka Lamata, Mitzvus Maisis, as it says at the bottom of page 1182. Then he brought the Zohar. The Zohar in Vayigash, where Kegavna, that the Eibishter created the lower worlds, Ovid Alma Tato Kegavna Alma Yilah. He created the lower world that it should be like and similar to the higher world. V'ihu Yikora Le'ela Ulatata. I looked up, Yikora is different translations. You said honor. Some translate it as glory. That is his glory. But honor is also right. And we could say later he uses the word hafla, wonder, grandeur. Bottom line, this expresses the glory of God. The honor of God, le'ela ulatata, above and below. And now he explains what that means. He says, tata, alma tata is malchus that goes into biyah. Alma ilah is atzilus, bina of atzilus, which is the mokir of ishtalshlus, the mokir of atzilus. So there you have is that the biyah, the malchus that goes in biyah is kegavna, is compared to and is like the higher world. Now they're two different worlds. Biyah is not elokus, it's not iu v'chayu echad, iu v'gamu echad, and that's the chiddush of the Zohar. Similar, he doesn't say it yet, but it's similar like the pasuk that the Shamayim Mimal, which would be like Al Milah, and Oretz Mitachas, they are kegavna. So that's what he says. So Ovid Alma Tato Kegavna Al Milah and Erein Sof Atzrus HaMaitzil, which is beyond both Atzilus and Biyah. Therefore, it radiates in both of them equally. It brings the pasuk Ma'biyah l'sheves hamashpil liris b'shamayim va'oretz. In other words, that he's equally distant from both of them. And that Shemayim va'oretz is Atzilus u'Biyah. And what does that mean? Just like there's Esesphiris and Eretz and Kelim and Atzilus, the same thing is in Biyah. And even though, in order for that to be the Gili of Alma Tato, in other words, the Kavanah is that the divine light that shines in the higher should also shine in the lower. And even though he says, the tzarech, and that's a Keich Ein Sof, because Ein Sof is higher than Atzilus and Biyah. He has the power to also make Biyah like Atzilus. And even though Vagam she'ena de magili b'Biyah kamei b'Atzilus, even though you can't compare the revelation in Biyah, which is a lower world, to Atzilus, because there's Iyu v'chayu echad, so there you have to say then that this is coming from a level of Ein Sof that's higher than the Shtalshalus, that not from Atzilus, it's coming from a place that's higher than Atzilus, and that's why it can radiate also in Biyah. And then he explained the difference between Ein Sof and Atzilus is only within Atzilus, it's Ein Sof. It's Ein Sof l'shpashtuse, it extends infinitely, but only in Atzilus. And the Ein Sof higher than Atzilus extends and can also permeate and be drawn into Biyah. Yeah. Umekol mokim tzarich lemer the kavanah shezeh ma she'ein sof meir begili b'biyah. And nevertheless, it's not just that it's possible to be there. The kavanah is to actually reveal that. That this Ein Sof should actually radiate in the Alma Tata, just as Ein Sof radiates in Alma Ilah, and should not remain concealed. And now he brings it back. And how is this done? How can we in Biyah, especially in the lowest levels, which are so much lower, he says, this is Maisa mitzvahs. This is when we do mitzvahs in the physical world, we're revealing and manifesting the divine will. That's the whole point of a mitzvah. Without doing a mitzvah, the material world is created by God, and yes, the highest levels of Ein Sof, even higher than Atzilus, can radiate here, but it's not revealed. When you do a mitzvah, he says the rotzen radiates begili ba mitzvah bli shum hester panim. That's what a mitzvah is. It's revealing the divine. Now you could ask the question, 1 second, in tzitzis or in a sefer Torah or in other mitzvahs ma'asis, you don't see elikus more than you see in the rest of the world. So Chassidus, in other places, explains, the Rebbe brings it in the first Maimer, Bas Lagani Tavshin Yud Aleph, that it's revealed, but it's not, we can't see it because it's like munach bekufsa. So when you do a mitzvah, you're actually revealing the divine, but right now it's still, because we have fleshika, we have eyes of flesh and blood, so we don't see it, but it's like the light is radiating, but it's like closed in a chest, in a treasure chest. And when Mashiach comes, it will be revealed. It won't be created, it'll be revealed. So a mitzvah, even though we may not see, it's true, we stand up for a Sefer Torah, but not everybody feels or sees Elikus in the Sefer Torah. So he says it's there. The Gashmis of the world was changed. After Matan Torah, everything is changed through doing a mitzvah. I'm just qualifying because someone had asked me, where do you see the Gili? He says, not Hester Punim. So he said, because the Gili is that the fact that you're doing a mitzvah with this physical world. So right now we don't see it, but it still has brought a revelation and has refined the world. So every time you do a mitzvah, you actually refine the Gashmis, the physicality of this reality of this world. And that's what he's talking about. Then he goes on and connects it to the Maimorim back in Truma, Ayin Hey, Raksha mitzvahs bedvarim hamutarim dafke. In other words, the mitzvahs are only done in dvarim mutarim, like he explains now 3 levels. There are things that are not permitted. The Torah distinguishes Chochmas Ma'aseh Bereishis created everything. Things that are pure, things that are impure. Torah comes to distinguish between the pure and the impure. And a mitzvah is in the pure itself, and that which is permitted. Not everything is right to be a mitzvah. Not everything God chose to be a mitzvah. So he says, close up the Torah is lahavdil ben hatomi lahatoyer. And then there's havdalah bepnimius, hainu b'dvarim hamutarim gufa. Nevertheless, not everything is a keli. B'kol lias kelim legili rotzen elyon are dafke the things that are called mitzvahs. The Daled Minim, he gives the example, That's Tzemer L'tzitzis, the wool for tzitzis, the cloth for tefillin. Why? Because these things have in them a certain element that makes them similar to what's above. So even though an apple is also mushrish in Atzilus, there's also a tapuach ruchni, so to speak, but nevertheless, the mitzvahs have a particular connection, and he gives two examples. The Daled Minim is Achdus, and Tzemer Tzitzis is B'dugma Sareshe K'omer Naka. Kamar Naka. So both of them, the Achdus of the Daled Minim, of the four species, reflects on a higher level of Achdus in Al Milah and Atzilus, and the white wool that you use for tzitzis reminds us of what it says in the Pasuk about Atik Yemen, that the hair on his head is white like wool, pure like wool. So these are Kelim Terotzen Elyon. So even though they're physical matters, Dvarim Gashmim Avelim Asiyah, but since they're Bedugma Shalom Ilah, that makes them into Kelim, then in them radiates Ein Sof like an Atzilus. And then he concludes with the end of the Zoyar, V'ilu Yikora Le'elu Latata, and this is the honor or glory of God above and below. Pirush, this is the haflah of Ein Sof. The wonder, the grandeur that Ein Sof was able to do something which is a chiddush. Because from the point of view of Atzilus, Atzilus is higher than Biyah. But Ein Sof that's higher than Atzilus, that's the honor, the glory, the aflah, is able to create Al Metato Kegavad Al Milah, and they should be able to draw down Ein Sof, not just in the higher worlds, but in the lowest of worlds, through the Maisa Mitzvahs. Okay. But like I said yesterday, I still have the question remains, what about all the other physical matters in this world? So, but Pashtus, you can say that when you do the Tayyag mitzvahs, which is covers the entire spectrum of life. There are mitzvahs in Daimim, Semeach, Chai, Medaber. The mitzvahs we do with mineral, with things that are inanimate. The things we do with Semeach, Hilchas Meiser, Truma. There's things with Chai, like Karbonis, Kashrus, and so on. Daimim, obviously, is anything that fits in the Daimim world, including Tzemer, actually. Well, Tzemer is probably Gedder Chai, because Tzemer comes from a wool, from a sheep. Or it could also be wool that grows Semeach. But Tzemer is not a good example for that. Or the Dal Minim is Tzemeach. So you could say the mitzvahs we do with every part of existence. And therefore, when you elevate through a mitzvah, you're elevating the rest of the world. That's all comes from that same species. So, for example, the Daled Minim, which is Agdus, in many ways you elevate the whole world with that, not just those species. You could say that's the general meaning of Dira B'Tachtenim, or there may be other ways to explain it. But he definitely clearly is stating that the Kagavna is dafka these mitzvahs which were chosen to be something because they reflect the higher world. He says that clearly. Kagavna de Almi Allah. So of course you could ask, as I said, the question, you could say every physical item is nishtalshal, evolves from a spiritual state. But nevertheless, clearly mitzvahs have something unique to them. That's what he says here. So we may get back to this. I'm going to think about it some more. Doesn't really change the Havana of the whole thing. But now he's introduced the concept of what the idea of bridging Gashmius and Ruchnius, that mitzvahs maisius, which some would argue, ayeh, what he says before, ayeh no elikechem. Like how could you, some would wonder, how could you find godliness in material actions, mitzvahs, maisius? You could only find it in spiritual. So we made a case here, no, that the below is just like above. And that's what the koyach ein sof, that's ikore le'elo le'elo. That's what we learned yesterday, and I just reviewed it for clarity purposes. I'm going to continue now, unless somebody has a question about this topic. Okay, so let's continue.
It sounds like you mixed up.
Learning now.
He's made
bottom. the paragraph that begins V'haramaz Pirish. We're in the bottom of page 1183. What's that? Something is wrong here. Hold on, give me a second here. Okay. There's the other background noise. Does anyone want to ask something? Okay, good. So
it sounds like you said
what?
That there is bechol drochacher da'eu, which means anything that's impermissible when you do it, you are mamshich halakus by bechol drochacher da'eu.
Where does he say that? I didn't see. Where does he say that?
Actually doing mitzvahs, which is a different level of bringing down a lakus.
This is what you're saying. He doesn't say this in the mimer here.
Yes, he says.
Where does he say b'chol drochacher da'eu?
And then he said in dvorim amutorim gufe there is the mitzvahs.
But where does he say b'chol drochacher da'eu?
I'm using the word b'chol drochacher da'eu, but when he says in general, when you do something.
But he's not saying that here. Here he's saying that dafke mitzvahs are kegavna the almi law. That's the main thing that I'm focusing on. Saying bedugma the almi law. Hem kelim l'rotzen elyon. The b'chol drochacher da'eu is very nice, but it's not discussing that here. It could be b'chol drochacher da'eu does not make al metato kamoy almi law. Maybe it's only like l'shem shamayim. It's only like b'chavona. Here he's speaking that mitzvahs have something unique. I did not say that you cannot make a b'chol drochacher da'eu. Obviously, that's part of the Aveda. But here he's focusing on mitzvahs maisis. But pashtus is because a mitzvah maisi, you'd think that a gashmizdik thing cannot be a keli for rotzen elyon. And he's saying it is a keli for rotzen elyon. B'chol drochacher da'eu does not say it's a keli for rotzen elyon. It says that you're aligning the physical world toward elikus. The ayel lekechem that they're asking the question is more, can you be mamshech elikus in a dover gashmi, dover maisa b'peil? And by saying it's a mitzvah, not reshus, it's much stronger than reshus and the drochacher da'eu. That's probably the reason he's bringing this, because a mitzvah drives the point home that mamish can be bring elikus as it is lamaila into this physical world through a mitzvah maisis. That probably is the answer to why he's focusing on mitzvahs, because it's much stronger than b'chol drochacher da'eu. So I do appreciate you bringing it up, but I think he's speaking here that the highest form of bringing elikus into this world. He doesn't say it yet here, but the fact is you can't do a mitzvah maisis in Atzilus. It's dafke in Elam Haza. On the previous page he said, Ikar Avgon Hamshachas Gil Elikus Lamato.
If Iker is the mitzvah, there's things that you do mitzvahs with, why does it say Dvarim Amutarim Dafke? It should say Dvarim that you do mitzvahs with.
Because if you go back to the Maimer and Truma, he's explaining that there. He wants to explain that first there's the difference between mutter and not mutter, and that itself. But Pashtus is trying to say that the Begili Mitzvah B'lishum Hester upon him is not in every aspect of existence. It's only in certain aspects, in things that are mutter, not in things that are asur. And that itself makes a mitzvah. In other words, he's trying to explain that there is things in this world that are similar and a keli to elikus like the higher world. Kegavne the alma tato, kegavne the alma lo. And that's mitzvahs. It's only dafkin dvarim mutarim. Not everything you can do a mitzvah in. That's most likely what he's saying here. Okay.
It sounds like he's trying to make a limited comparison that we down here below can be similar to what's going on above in a certain way. And the yeah.
Like I just said, if you just said that this world can be aligned to godliness, there, even the people who argue that there's a difference between Ruchnis and Gashmis can accept that. You can live in this material world and align yourself to godliness. But the bottom line is, primary godliness is in Ruchnis, not in Gashmis. But once you understand the Zohar, says no, in this world, in this material world, there are things, objects, Talid Minim, Tzitzis, Tefillin, and so on, that are physical items, and they're actually kelim to the Ratzon Elyon because they're kegavna, they're similar to Ruchni's Dika levels, in the sense that they are like Achdus or Semer, like he says, Karesh Ka'amar, Beresh Naka, Kasadesh Ka'amar Naka. In other words, there are things in this world that are actually kelim to Likus, just like in Atzilus. And that's not everything. That's clearly not everything. That's why mitzvahs are not with every object on earth. I know when you read the Zohar, it doesn't say that. The Zohar doesn't anywhere indicate it's mitzvahs. It just says, Al mitato k'gamed al milah. But as I said, let's read on, let's continue on, and we'll go back to this if need be. So let's continue. I'm going to read from the beginning of the paragraph, bottom of page 1183. If you want to go follow the text, go to ayinbeis.com. So now he's going to go to the Zohar. He's going back to the Zohar. The operative Zohar here is Vayigash 205b. And he's going to bring now Rab Moshe Zakuta, Ramaz. The Ramaz is a classic commentary on Zohar from the Talmidei, students of the Arizal. And his name is Rab Moshe Zakuta, Ramaz for short. You'll see it quite often in Chassidus. So now he says the Ramaz Pirush, when you say V'ir Yikore, Le'elo Latata, he says Yikore, till now we said Haflah, wonder, grandeur, glory, honor. It says, Pirush Yikare hu b'chinas levush. Yikare is the level of a garment. Basically, a garment that is honorable, but you'll see in a second. Ukamoi Rabbi Yehuda, Kari lemane machbedusa. He called his garment his honor. In other words, when a king, well, in this case, it's a Talmid Chacham, wears a garment, the garment reflects his kingship, his royalty, his honor, his kavod. So even though it's only a garment, but he called his garment like a garment of, like a king is supposed to wear a royal garment. Same thing, a Talmid Chacham is supposed to wear a garment that reflects his stature. So he called Mane Machbedusa. What does that mean in the context of the Zohar? This means the b'chinas alma ilav etata hem b'chinas levushim ela'er shemislabes b'seicham. So when you say na yikore le'ela latata, not just saying their honor, their glory, the glory of the Eibishter, you're saying that the higher world and the lower world, because Allah vitata, are garments to the Eir that manifests in them. So that's the level that we're talking about now, as a garment. What does that mean? He says, "V'hu b'chinas hakav v'chut shemislabish be'eses sfiras d'atzilis ad b'chinas malchus d'atzilis." This is referring to the eir shemislabish b'seicham, is referring to the kav v'chut. The eses sfiras of atzilis are like the garment. The kav v'chut, which is the line, the thread of light that follows the tzimtzum, is the Eir that manifests in the 10 spheres of Atzilus, all the way to Malchus of Atzilus, which of course also v'gam b'biyah, and also into biyah, b'kei ha'aras hakav. And also in biyah, the light, the reflection of the kav pierces, b'kei, it pierces through. Let's read on before we understand what the full context of what he wants to say is. Like he writes in a Geras HaKedesh in Tanya, the 20th epistle, the 20th section, the Aras HaKav, Boka HaParsa Imohem, that the reflection of the Kav pierced the Parsa. After Atzilus, there's a Parsa, a partition. So it pierced the Parsa Imohem with them. V'hainu, b'chinas ha'er pnimi shemeya gam ken b'biyah. So in other words, it's not just that the reflection, not just Malchus and the spheres that go through the Parsa, that also the Kav itself, the Ha'ara, the reflection of the Kav, pierced Boka, pierced the partition with all the Oiras, with everything that's being nimshach there. And what does that mean? V'hainu, b'chinas ha'er pnimi shemeya gam ken b'biyah. That means there's an er pnimi. The kav, remembers er pnimi. If you remember, chetzenes hakav, pnimi hakav, which goes all the way up before the tzimtzum, rooted before the tzimtzum, that this internal, immanent energy radiates also in biyah. In other words, not just an al milah, but also an al matata. Okay, so what does he say? Let's spell this out. Till now, the interpretation was that Yikore was what? Was the hafla, the wonder of Ein Sof that radiates, that creates the lower similar to the higher, and that you could have Elikus from the higher level could also come into the lower level. That Biyah and Atzilus should be equal. Now he's adding Yikore is also from the word levush, garment, because referring to the garment of the Esesris of Atzilus and the garment, what he says clearly, both of Atzilus and Biyah are garments to the Kav. So remember, he said before that the Ein Sof higher than Atzilus also goes into Biyah. Atzilus does not. Atzilus needs to go through a partition, and therefore, what's in Atzilus remains in Atzilus. But the Kav, which is a higher than Atzilus, that goes all the way back before to the Tzimtzum, that pierces Biyah. So in other words, the Kav is entering through the garment, both in Atzilus and in Biyah. So Yikore, the Yikore Le'elu L'Tata is saying that that he created the higher and the lower is the Kav that's manifesting in the garments of Atzilus and Biyah. That's what he's added here. Okay, but now presents itself a question. So then what is the difference between it says, Ovid al matata kagavid al milah, the ihu yikarid le'elo latata. First he says he created the lower world similar to, like, corresponding to the higher world. And he says, and that's his honor and glory. That's the garment, the honorable garment, or the glory, the royal garment, le'elo latata. So what is Ovid al matata? What did he create? So he says, Umashakosov Ovid al matata. He says that's not Er Pnimi. Er Pnimi is the kav that manifests in the garment. Ovid al matata, when he says that he created al matata, hu agili de er makif. That's the revelation of the transcendent energy. And then when he says ve'emre ve'iru yikare, hu agili da er pnimi shemer gam ken begili bibiyah. Okay, interesting how he's explaining this now. So basically, the creation of the lower world, like the higher world, that's still Pimtzad Er Makif. The Er Makif is an equalizer between higher and lower, because the Makif surrounds everything. That seems to be what he's saying. Ovid al-metato hagili de'er makif. I need to think about it, but that's what it means. Seems to be obvious, the interpretation. I'm not positive. And then the second part where he says, this is his glory, this is his garment, his garment, his royal garment, that is already how it manifests in an internal way. So basically, the Er Makif is an equalizer between Atzilus and Biyah out of Makif, because Makif is beyond them both. But you could still argue that the Er Pnimi, there's a difference between them. Comes the Yikorei and says, no, the Kav also goes into Biyah, that also in Biyah, it also equalizes Shemayim Emal v'Arz Mitachas. That's what it sounds like he just said, but this is going to be explained more. If you're not following, it's because it's very short and brief and dense. I'm going to try to explain this, but that's right now what I would say for now. So we're talking about two ways of equalizing. One is Makif. That's just the mere creation of Biyah, and Atzil is both created by a higher force that's beyond both of them. And then there's the Gili Pnimi in Biyah. Like he said, it has to be a Gili. And that's through the Kav, that's Yikorei. That it's actually, it's the garment that is dressing up, a levushim of the, it's a levush to the Kav. So that's a Er Pnimi. That's what he's saying here. Okay. Okay, I see he's going to continue now the Pirush and the Zeh. Does anybody want to ask something?
Oh,
Remember, this is still not finished, so it could be a little complicated, but we'll get through it. If you don't mind, I want to bring out a Zohar. Give me a second, because I see he's continuing now with the Zohar. Okay, I'll read on the Zohar. You know what? I'll read it from here. If I need it, I'll look at it later.
Could I ask you something?
Yeah, sure.
He said that v'hainu b'chinas ha'er pnei mishemeir gam ken b'viyah. So the ihu yikore means that it's becoming in biyah also er pnimi. Ovid al-tato is only the er makif. In ihu yikore, it's becoming er pnimi. Am I right?
Correct. Yeah. Hainu b'chinas ha'er pnimi shemeir gam ken b'biyah. Correct. Yeah. In other words, to say that in Biyah, let's say in Mitzvah Smaisi, Shemam Shechaer Makif, that you could say, you know what, because it's still Makif. It's not Pnimius in this world. If you want a Pnimius, you need Atzilus, is higher than Biyah. But the Chiddush here is not just in Makif, also Pnimi, also is Al Metato Kamei Al Milah. That's what he's saying. Yeah, that's the Chiddush here.
Isn't this the way we explain our Seiviv and our Mamala? Our Seiviv is everywhere equally, and Mamala, it shows in everything according to...
Yeah, that's the Chiddush here, exactly. And that's why, and even Mamala here, the Kav also enters into Biyah, that through a mitzvah, you can also be Mamshech Mamala, just as you Mamshech it Natzilis. That's the Chiddush here, yeah. In other words, you could say Mitzat Seviv, there's an equality between Shemayim and Mal V'Aretz Mitachas. But who says Mitzat Er Pnimi? And that's what he adds. That's what, according to the Ramaz, that's what comes emphasized. Without the Ramaz, you're not sure, it's not clear what level that is. That's B'Pashtus what the Ramaz is adding, according to the way the Rebbe Rashab explains it. But he continues, it's not over, the Zohar continues.
Rabbi, it sounds like from the first lines of the top of the page of Aleph Kuf Pei Gimel that the equality between Atzilus and our world is from the Makif, not necessarily from the Pnimi.
Well, first of all, I don't know where it sounds. He doesn't say anything there.
He said, well, that's what he says. He says, if you call he says.
Where do you see the word makif?
Oh, hold on. Just let me continue one moment, if you don't mind. The third line, he says, "You do it. The ikar makor is to talk into alma the law tato kagate almi law alma tato kagate almi law that the Orient Sof atmas matzu moved to era from Olamos And therefore that shines into both worlds. It seems like the idea of the Aviv Malmi Alma Tata, that's where we find the equality between both worlds. Not necessarily from the Kore, the Panimi. That's the question I'm asking.
Well, now that we learned the second interpretation from the Ramaz, you could say that before this, in general, you could say that it's more mitzad makiv, there's an equality, and that equality also affects, therefore should be an equality between Biyah and Atzilus, that even in Biyah, you can also draw down a lakus, just like an Atzilus, and that's the Yukari would be the hafla of Eir Ein Sof. So it's really capturing the awesomeness, the grandeur, that godliness that's higher than Atzilus can come down even in Biyah in a revealed way through mitzvahs. The mitzvahs are kelim. Now he's going into the language of Makif and Panimi, which he did not say before. So yes, correct. Now the Ramaz, we touch Yukare from the word levush, so it's a garment to what? To the kav. That's a inyan Panimi, because the kav is a Panimi. So in addition to the Makif of Ovid Almatato Kagav Almilah, you now also have the Yukare is the Yeker, is the levush that also Panimi. So at the end of the day, yes, but he didn't state it explicitly. When you read it now, back and forth, clearly, earlier, you can still talk about Makif because he didn't mention it. So generally speaking, I don't know, without the Ramaz, how you would interpret it. You could just say he created the lower world like the higher world. And that's his honor, that's the flaw of Ein Sof, that he can, both of them can equally manifest godliness. And therefore, even in Biyah, through the mitzvahs are kelim, two, just like the Almilah, two, they are similar to the higher worlds. I would just say that before it's more general. He doesn't really break it down. Now it's being broken down into Makif and Pnimi. That's what I would say. I don't know if I would use the Makif earlier. You could or you could not. He does say Hashva, which is usually on Makif, but now he's saying both on the Makif level. That's Ovid. And Yukare is Pnimi level. Both of them, you have the equality of Atzilus and Biyah. Okay?
Yeah, good.
Okay, good. Now he continues. Omer Rab Yitzchok, probably, I'm not sure. It could be Omer Rab Yehuda. Omer Rab Yitzchok. He's continuing. The Zohar continues now. Hachi hu vadai. Ubara Adam al Kula. After he says that the Eibishter created, made the lower world similar to the high upper world, and this is his glory or honor, above and below, like we just touched the Ramaz. That means levush, that's a garment. Even in Biyah, the Kav pierces Biyah as well. So the Zohar continues now that Rabbi Yitzchak says, Hachi hu vadai. And now this is for certain that above the worlds, he created human being, al kula. Above them all, meaning above Ilah and Tata, he created the human being, ahadu diksiv, anoichi asisi eretz, v'odem aleha barasi. So the Zohar, Rabbi Yitzchak brings, I created, I made the world, I made the earth, and the earth and the human being above it, I created. In other words, the human being hovers, is above existence. So after saying that the lower world is created like the higher world, and they're both Yukari Le'elo Latata, he says now the human being is above them both, above all of them. Actually, it's not Rabbi Yitzchak, it's Rabbi Yehuda. Because look now, he says, Pirush Rabbi Yehuda. It was Omer Rabbi Yehuda, not Omer Rabbi Yitzchak. I correct myself. Pirush, what is the meaning of what is Rabbi Yehuda coming to add in the Zohar? We just explained the Zohar in a very interesting way. What is Rabbi Yehuda coming? He says, Pirush, Rabbi Yehuda Bolavayer. Rabbi Yehuda is coming to explain. Eichu sheyeh gili ha'er b'biyah. Rabbi Yehuda is concerned with the issue. How could you bring? What's the functionality of this that you bring the gili ha'er in biyah? Shari yedua de betoyu lo yischabras atzilis im abriya. It's known that in the world of Toyu, there was no connection, there was no relationship, no ischabris, no attachment between Atzilus and Bria. Not sure what that means right now, but let's read on and we'll see where he's going. The Keshem Shasfiris, next page, 1184. The Keshem Shasfiris of Teyu, Hoyu B'Bchinis Pirud. We know that the Sfiris and Teyu were separate; they were not interconnected. Chochmeh, Bina, Das, Chesed, Gvura, Hiskalolus, where there's a complete interconnectivity, is Dafka in the world of Atzilus, in Tikkun. In Toyu, the spheres are separate from one another. Kamoikeni says, which means the levels of Atzilus, B'ri, Yitzir, Asi in Toyu were also not united. There was no unity. The Kagavna of Alma Tato and Alma Elo did not exist in Toyu, because Toyu, everything is separate. It's a bunch of separate entities. Ukamoshin is barley ill, like was explained earlier, Dibra Maskal Pinchas, the Maimer of Pinchas. I always like to look quickly, just to refresh my memory. Pinchas, we're talking about, okay. Yeah. Yeah, the Maimer Pinchas, 1161. So there we start speaking about Berurim. Go back to Berurim, page 1163. He discusses this topic of Pirud. That in Toyu, everything was separate. 1162, 1163. And Tikkun came to repair it and connect it all. We learned about Toyu at length at the end of volume 1, if you may recall. So he's saying, he's explaining now what Rabbi Yehuda is coming to add. So he says like this. So just like the spheres are separate, the world's there. Remember, every world encompasses all the worlds. So to speak, Atzilus, B'ri, Yitzir, Asiya, they were not connected. They were separate. Like he says, the Maimer Pinchas, Ubetikun, and the world of Tikkun, which is the world of Atzilus, Vrudim, Hushan Ischadish Lias Ischabes Atzilus Abiyah. In Tikkun, what was Nischadish? What was innovated? What was the new revelation? In Tikkun, there should be a Ischabris, that Atzilus and Biyah should become attached and connected. So the Rabbi Yehuda is wondering, Vayde Mahu Ischabris. What exactly is bringing this Ischabris? What's connecting them? The Gam. So even though the Zohar Taka says Le'elo Latata are connected, and not just Makif, but also Pnimi, because the Kav comes down, Yikare, Yakar, the Lavush. But now the question is, what connects them? In Toyu, they weren't connected. So what connects them? The Gam, additional question Rabbi Yehuda is wondering. The truth is, Biyah is infinitely distant from Atzilus. The Atzilus or Elikus Mamish. Going back to the point, Elikus Mamish is, Atzilus is pure divine. Obviously, there are higher levels than Atzilus, but Atzilus is nothing but Elikus Mamish. Aval Biyah in Bechinis Yesh, and Biyah is a level, but however, Biyah is a level of Yesh. How then can you bring the revelation also into Biyah on an equal level? On a diminished level, fine. But how could you compare the two? In other words, the Zohar makes the statement. He already explained that came from the power of Eid Ein Sof that's higher than Atzilus. But he wants to know, how do you bring that Eid Ein Sof into reality? That's Rabbi Yehuda is coming to explain this. Now, interestingly, what just came to mind when I'm reading this sounds very similar to the question we've been dealing with the last 108, 190 pages. How can you bring up after the Parsa? Remember, the whole thing began with the Torah of the Magid. It's one thing that Atzilus is united with Elikus. But how could you also connect Biyah that comes after the partition? Or in broader terms, how can post-Tzimtzum reality experience pre-Tzimtzum consciousness? It looks very similar to what he's bringing down here. He's bringing it all into the picture in the Zohar. So you see, even though it seems like a little tangential, but it all comes together because he wants to explain how b'shamayim mimal va'aretz mitoches v'yadaita yem v'shalvis ki Hashem olakim das elyon and das tachten. The yichud should come all the way down to the lowest levels. So Rabbi Yehuda says is coming to explain. Number one, what connects Atzilus and Biyah when in Toyu they're not connected yet, and number two, they are at the end of the day they're infinitely distant. So how can you have in Biyah such a Gili like an Atzilus? One is Alakus Mamish, one is Yesh. The Ima Yes, the Mitzad Eidin Sof Shalamayla Mistalsis, the Rebbe Rashab obviously knows what he said last page. You just told us that this happens not through Atzilus, it happens through Eidin Sof that's higher than Ishtalshus. Ima Yes, the Mitzad Eidin Sof Shalamayla Mistalsis, like we explained in the last page, that due to the infinite divine light that's higher than the cosmic order. The Hainu B'chinas Eidin Sof HaSeviv. Okay, now he says clearly, Seviv. That means due to the infinite divine light of Seviv, Makif, that which is below is possible to be like above. Like what he said, yeah. I, the heaven and earth, ani mole. It doesn't say that he fills heaven one way and earth another. I fill heaven and earth bashva equally. That's mitzad the Eidin Sof that's higher than Ishtalshlus. So now clearly what you asked me before, he clearly is associating that level with Seviv. Then Yikore later with the Ramaz comes to explain it's also comes down in a Pnimi. But now he's saying mitzad Seviv is bashva. So even though we learn that we know that, Ukaneda, the Be'eidin Sof HaSeviv Kalaman. We know that the Eidin Sof, the transcendent energy of Seviv Kalaman, Lo yesh ischalkus ma'ilo mata. There's no distinction between higher and lower, and therefore no distinction between Atzilus and Biyah. The Iyu Tofis Bekula Alman, he is Tofis. He grasps and he contains all the worlds. V'lesman the Tofis Bay, and nothing can grasp him. He grasps everything, and nothing can grasp him. It's like saying, "Hu mekame shalelam ve'ena ela mekame." So the Eibishter fills everything, but nothing can fill him, nothing grasps him, which means he's beyond it all. U'kamoshin is barely ill. So the Chayra, why is Rabbi Yehuda concerned? It's coming from a power of Sevav Kalaman. What are you asking me about his chabrus of Atzilus and Biyah and its equality? It's coming mitzat Sevav Kalaman, like we learned earlier. Hine kol zehu behelam. Shenimtze b'kol mokim. Mitzad makif, it remains concealed. That's not a chiddush. Yes, the makif is an equalizer, but that's concealed. You don't see that in Biyah. In the revealed, you see Biyah is lower than Atzilus. The makif, yes, true from the makif's point of view, it's an equalizer between that which is above, that which is below, but it's concealed. Rakshahu behelam. So it's equal everywhere. Ani mole. It's a shemayim v'saretz ani mole. I fill heaven and earth, but it's rakshahu behelam, but it's in a concealed state. The question that Rabbi Yehuda is concerned with, aval eichia gili b'chinas era seviv lamata. We want to know how you're going to reveal it. Once you deal with revelation, Biyah is not Atzilus. You're talking about Seviv. Seviv is above both of them, so it equalizes. But remember, he said in the previous page also that the kavanah should be begili. So that's the question. How is it going to come begili lamato kamoy harotzna elyon? Like, how does that come lamato? Like, for example, the rotzna elyon, which is makif seviv, the demitzvahs canal. So the fact that inyan seviv is everywhere equal, correct, but it's concealed. How are you going to reveal that as, like, for example, in mitzvahs, revealing seviv rotzna elyon in mitzvahs canal? And he continues with the question. More. So first question is, besides what he said, that is how are you going to reveal this Eira Seviv? Eira Seviv is by definition concealed. He says, and it's even more wondrous or even more challenging to understand. Yes, and nifla, more what's the word I want to use? More surprising or more wondrous. B'bchinas er pnimi. Shu b'chinas gili er b'chinas er b'keli. So er pnimi, which there is a distinction between one level and the next. How do you find the equality there? Because er pnimi taka comes in a form of gili er. It's revealed not like the makif and seviv, which is concealed, and it's in the er b'kili. The er comes in a keli. Seviv doesn't have kelim. Rotzen does not have a keli. Rotzen does not have a localized place in the human body where it resides. Eris and kelim is pnimi, immanent energy. And how can you have this gili as it is not silis in biyah, which is a state of yesh? So one question is, how do you reveal the makif, which is an equalizer? Number two, in the world of pnimi, even though it's true that we said that it comes from the power of Ein Sof, but how do you actually do it? How do you actualize this? That in biyah, in yesh, you should have a gili in pnimi, like a gili of a higher level, so it's even more nifla. Okay. So we have the questions, and now the Rebbe Rashab is going to go to explain. He says, "V'oid zeis the Rabbi Yehuda mavayed Ayin be'emi kesem k'meshem mavayed Rabbi Yitzchak."
What is gilui bli pnimi?
What?
Could be gilui bli pnimi. If
Where do you see gili plimi?
No, you said before, Echia gilui say it's behelem. B'yesel b'pchinas pnimi. If it's gilui, it's pnimi, no?
Yeser nifla, I just explained. There's one question is on seviv. Now the question even more is how a pnimi, which is a real state, can be equal to atzilus. It's more nifla.
A line before he said Echia gilui b'chinas seviv. Gilui means pnimi, no?
No, not necessarily. You could have a gili of seviv. You could have the gili of pnimi. Gili HaSeviv is a Gili of Elikuz that's higher than all the dargas. Whether it has to go through a prim is another question, but right now he's talking about two separate things. I'm going to stop here because it's already time, but he's now going to go and explain Rabbi Yehuda says is even deeper than Rabbi Yitzchak. I got to go back to the Zohar and see what it seems like Kad Bora Kutchebrichu maybe is Rabbi Yitzchak. I want to go back into the Zohar, so I'll do that by tomorrow morning. I'll have that clear. But bottom line is, we're now coming to explain more how this happens, this whole process of unifying Atzilus and Biyah to the point that Biyah has the Gili Elikus in Maisa Mitzvahs just as it is in the higher levels. And now he's broken it down in both in Gili and the Makif and in the Pnimi. And we need to understand how that becomes the same. So it's taka haflaw of Ein Sof, but still, how is it implemented? Now, obviously, the answer is going to be that's the Adam that's above them all. The human being is the one that can accomplish that. But I don't want to jump the gun, so we'll learn that. And I want to go back and understand who's Rabbi Yitzchak and what Rabbi Yehuda is adding to Rabbi Yitzchak. Okay, so we'll stop here. Basically, around almost a half down, page 1184. Any questions, my friends? Any questions? No? Okay. So we'll stop here, 1184.
Yeah, Shakoyach, now that our heads are spinning.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of spinning here.
Come back intact from your